POW Comic Hour with your hosts, Andrew Bonner
and Chris Ramos.
All right, we are back from the dead, back from the space of existence, with another great comic book review. And we're so glad to be back in the studio again, recording. And our first book back on this, picking up where we left off in season 9, is Superman Space Age by Mark Russell, Michael Allred, and Laura Allred.
Mike and Laura, husband and wife.
Yep. And Mark.
And Mark. Mark's the writer.
Yes.
Good job, Mark.
Right. And so for me, this was my 2023 book of the year. I really felt that there was such a lot that came out last year, and it is kind of still hard reading your own personal collection while also keeping up with what's currently being released.
Yeah, all the back, all your backlog, you see all these books staring at you on the bookshelf, and you're like, well, there's some new shiny ones that just came out. I'll get to you when I can.
Yeah, and there's just so much coming out. It's hard to keep up with. But what I did see that was coming out, and we are kind of fans of Michael Allred, and so we thought, hey, let's check this out, see what's up with it. I read it first, and I said, wow, okay, this is really exciting. It kind of goes back to what we love about comics, and it's a really interesting take on the origin story of Superman. It's kind of cliche to say the origin of Superman because it's been done how many times?
Yeah.
How many versions of the Superman origin story are there?
That's the ultimate challenge, and it might also be kind of the ultimate deterrent for people who want to write Superman.
Yeah,
because they think, what am I going to add to the character? And I hope I don't take away, right? So
Sure.
they're just kind of scared of going into it.
Right.
But Mark Russell knocked it out of the park. This is really refreshing. And it's, like you said, if you hear about books doing well like this, and then once Andrew said, hey, this is book of the year, this is great. I think I was like, got it, bought it.
Right.
Let's do it. So
Yeah.
we are looking for exciting new reads, and every once in a while it comes with a legacy character like Superman.
Absolutely. And so you picked up the hardcover edition that just came out, and I read it digitally on Hoopla. I do think this will get a deluxe treatment at some point. Because I think it did really well last year. It's really well received. And then DC usually goes, okay, it's getting some good attention. Let's put it in deluxe treatment. Let's do an oversized edition.
Yeah.
And things like that. So,
well, and his artwork too, that would translate just fine to an oversized.
Yeah.
Because it's pretty much drawn in the style that you want to be oversized.
Sure. Similar to when we read Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow by Tom King.
Right.
That's getting oversized treatment now in deluxe format. So, and what the series and the movie getting announced for it, absolutely. So I could just see DC going, hey, yeah, we'll invest in it. And, there's a lot of star power behind this with Michael Allred to it, and Mark Russell. He was known for an infamous Flintstones book of all properties and things like that. But I guess there was such a big reverence and big when that came out. It hit the scene really hard, and people who were like, "What's this comic?" And then everybody's like, "Whoa, this is huge!"
It was weird because it was Flintstones and in comic form, and everyone at first wanted to just sort of dismiss it, right?
Yes,
but then the nostalgia kicked in, and then the story was spot on. And then that's when you know that you want these comics to have that perfect mix of like, hey, the story is engaging, the artwork is great, and you've got a character that everyone already knows. So you don't have to start all over from nothing.
And so he's also did Fantastic Four Life Story. That was similar to Spider-Man Life Story, where he did it in real time, like the Fantastic Four growing up in real time.
Yeah, it's like the Fantastic Four, and Spider-Man came out in 1966. So the comic for Spider-Man Life Story is, what if he just aged normally, and the story went along. And now Spidey is 52 years old or whatever. It's like, what if that happened? What if the superheroes were not these forever?
And they love that formula. So Marvel loved that formula so much. Like, can you do another one? So they chose Mark Russell for it, and he did the best job he could with that. And so I think he does such a good, has a great comic history or knowledge of what the characters he's writing for is,
Mhm.
or he has a certain vision of it. And I think he works really good at kind of narrowing it down, that voice, for that nostalgia period.
Well,
and,
I
and doing
noticed-
some new ground too in it.
Yeah, like that's what I was saying. I noticed there was a good mix of keeping the character from what people remember and understand, and kind of like that's their persona, and you need to leave that, right? But then also his writing got into that like psyche of what it means to be that type of hero.
Yes.
So one of the really strong points that I thought, and then we'll get into like
Yeah.
a spoiler or how we're doing it, but
Right.
one of the really strong points was each character had such a unique, quirky take on themselves.
Oh, sure.
And Mark Russell like really dove into, okay, if this character is only going to be in this comic for 2 pages and they only have 10 dialogue boxes,
right,
what would they say?
Like,
For real, what would they say? And
Sure.
how outlandish, how quirky, how unique would it be? And he did a really good job of that. And he writes Superman really as like this big retrospective kind of like, are my efforts wasted kind of thing. And
he's
I always
very
think that's a Superman.
insightful in himself and the world around him.
Like cautious to the point
Yes.
of like, I have this ultimate power, but really, what am I supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
And like no one's there to answer it.
Sure. And another thing about this book, and we kind of talked about it warming up for the show, was that this is also a Elseworld story. So it is its own universe, and it is also like a one-shot story that is self-contained. So anybody could pick it up as well. There's really nothing you have to lead up to it. You might want to know who Superman is or who Batman is. You've seen a movie or things like that. You can have a foundation knowledge.
96% of the characters in here you already know,
Yes.
but there's some
few,
other ones you might
right.
want to look up a little bit.
Yeah, and we'll kind of address those as we go into it. But for being a self-contained story, I think it's really easy and mostly new reader friendly to pick it up. And even if you didn't know anything and you just read it for what it was, you could also discover like, okay, where did he come from?
Mhm.
Like, what's more to it? There's plenty of material out there that builds about it.
So there's our 10-minute like, you should buy this book and read it. So now, right. You can pause the podcast and read it, and then come back now because we're going to dive into a full spoiler chat about this book. And I think it's going to be an exciting way to kind of jump into comics, is to say, hey, we read it. You got to take our word by now and jump into it, then come back and we'll discuss.
Yes, absolutely. All right, let's dig into it. So, I'll kind of start off just kind of reading the first like 2 pages of a little bit of the dialogue here, because it kind of sets the tone of what's coming. It's like 1985, and Superman kind of drifting off into space, and he's coming into the atmosphere. He says, something my father, Jor-El, once told me, that it is better to live with purpose and die by accident than to live by accident and die without purpose. There's no point, he said, in wasting your life clawing for money or fame or approval, in living a life that wasn't meant for you. Because when the end finally comes, all of that, everything you've ever considered and accomplished, stripped away. And all you have left is who you were. Wow. Oh, that's not a Superman story I've read before.
Yeah, it's a good way to start it. Because first of all, it just launches right into, hey, it's Superman. And you don't need an origin. You don't need to show him as a baby. You don't need to show Krypton exploding. It's just like, this is the character, you know who it is. So let's just get to the meat right now.
Yeah. And it's also like, he's not very go-lucky. Everything's not hunky-dory or,
that's true.
And it's not impending doom that he's just describing, but he's trying to be purposeful with like the time he has on Earth, or time that he has to do with what he wants to accomplish. Like, he's trying to find his purpose in life. He's going through his midlife crisis, if you will. So he's like, oh, okay. So then he kind of reflects on just like what's going on. He's kind of preparing. Yeah, like the Easter egg starts showing up, like the city of Candor in the
Yeah.
bottle. Yeah, and then they're in the Fortress of Solitude, him, Lois, and they're preparing for this impending doom. It's kind of weird that we get to see John in this book.
Yes,
Yeah,
his
it's his
son.
first son. Yeah. And it's like, oh, John's here. Okay, that's different. Okay, I guess writers, John, I think he's only been around for what, 5 years maybe.
Yeah, I mean, as far as stories go, Superman's never really had a. They've had some funny stories here and there. Like
Right.
Superman could have kids, but John was established as a in canon character
Yeah.
in DC. So
Yeah, he's pretty recent history, but to have him in the book, I thought that was really interesting
mhm.
because that's something maybe writers, when they started out, maybe they would have started that family right away, but nobody was ever willing to do that for him because they
Yeah.
didn't want to age him up that fast or say this is when this happens and this is how old he is.
Well, I think putting it at the beginning of the book too ties it right into this overarching story for Superman is about family,
Yes.
and it's about like you know continuing on your legacy, whether it's in your children or in
Right.
a legacy of just like humans in general.
Yeah.
Um, but it just right away sets it up as okay, there's Superman, Lois, and John, and then it does a little bit of a flashback
Yep.
to Superman and the Kents. So
Yes.
it's like
Back to 1963.
yeah, it's like all right, John is the little guy with his parents, and then now Superman is there with his parents. So
Yes.
it's like this good little transition, right? Like, ooh,
Yeah.
good fade, good fade.
Right. And so he kind of walk through the day in the life of of Superman, Clark Kent. Well, he's not even Clark Kent yet. He's just kind of growing up on the farm, and his father actually is telling like his backstory of this is what happened during the war. And have they explored that before this book, to your
Well,
knowledge?
I what often happens is they don't usually solidify a date so strong.
Sure.
So like in this, it's like, hey, on the TV is JFK was just
Right.
assassinated, and you're like, wow, that grounds it to a date and a time. Like,
Sure.
really,
So
really
then
solid.
by saying um his father was, or not his father, but his adopted father was like in World War II, and this is what he's seen and encountered, and this is how he informed all of his decisions. That was like a huge thing.
Well, and like what it
It
did
kind of
was
sets the tone.
yeah, and it took Superman from the 40s being a
Yeah.
superhero from the 40s
Right.
to now being in the 60s.
Yeah.
And then of course that's the space race. So that's the Superman space
Yep.
age. So, starting his story in the 60s, and he's I don't know, 20 years old. So he
Yeah.
was like he
That sounds
was
right.
about
Yeah.
the same age, but he's not a superhero yet.
No.
So it also helps because he's in the same um like chronological world as Bruce Wayne. And so
Yes.
all of the other heroes are kind of like at the same time. Where if you really think about it, Superman was a hero for 20 some odd years before anyone else showed up. So
Well,
that's what they're always trying to say is like, Superman, Batman, like they chronologically came out around the same time, but
mhm.
but he had been an acting superhero for a long time.
Right. And yeah, his father is just kind of talking about the horrors and what he experienced through World War II. And then all of a sudden, he's like, I didn't want to re-enlist. I just wanted to enjoy the simple farm life and, with your mother. And all of a sudden, we are just sitting on the patio. And boom, you came in. You came in from a rocket. But then they said, oh, there's another piece from the rocket that shot off. And I was like, oh, okay. And they're talking about like the Fortress of Solitude and kind of how that started. And it's like, oh, okay. That's a
Yeah,
different way to think about it.
it's interesting that they kept all of the same mechanics and same themes as regular Superman story,
Yeah.
but they just twisted it a tiny bit.
Tiny
but like I
bit.
said, not too much to throw readers off and be like, okay, this is not my Superman,
Right.
but just enough to keep it a little fresh. And that is probably the biggest challenge
Yeah.
is to still have a character feel like a character,
Right.
but just spin it a little. And I do like that Superman isn't portrayed as, and again, these are a little mildly spoilerish, but he's not portrayed as like lost. He's not portrayed as
No.
Kind of like a fitful teenager. He's just wondering, like, whose advice should I be listening
For
to?
sure. What else
And
is out there?
yeah, and what really should I be doing?
Right.
And that's kind of cool for
Well,
him
the
to
coming of
find
the
out.
age.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's kind of, yeah. So they kind of go over, they kind of, like we were saying, solidifying dates where they say JFK getting assassinated. And that was like a huge moment that stuck out for both him and his parents, and saying like, okay, I got to do something with my life because the world needs saving, but I don't know if I can do it from the farm.
Yeah, like they were legitimately scared of a widespread world war from JFK being removed.
Right.
So that was the catalyst for Superman to get off the couch, right?
Yes.
So I like that they used a real world event to say, hey, this is the moment that Clark Kent realized he can't just sit on the farm all day.
Right.
And to me, that's a really great way to ground your comics, is to give them real excuses to become a superhero.
Right. Yeah. Basically, he kind of took all these real world events that were coming up in some of the most eventful periods in the last 50 years and said, hey, this is where we can kind of ground it. And this is where we can start. And especially during, chapter 1's the 60s, chapter 2 is the 70s, and chapter 3 is the 80s.
Yes.
So it just kind of set the precedence there. So, but yeah, it was kind of cool. We kind of see like his career starting to develop in the 60s. Along the way, we could see like Hal Jordan just show up. and I was like, oh, and because Mark wants to, acknowledge that, hey, all these the Justice League is still in this world. They do share the same universe. And he kind of helps saves the day from like a missile attack. He starts out like really early in his career. So that was cool to see.
One thing I picked up on when in the 60s, he went to live in Metropolis. And okay, so like here's one of the funny parts that I kind of starred. In most Superman stories, even in the movies, he acts like a goofy person. He acts like a weak person, Clark Kent. So people don't focus on him.
Sure.
So he uses it as a distraction to sort of smoke and mirrors. And that way, if you saw someone that was just, holding their head really low and their shoulders hunched and just being goofy and tripping and falling, and you wouldn't be like, that's the strongest person in the world, right?
Sure.
So, but in this, they don't go that route. They just say, okay, you're going, here you go, Clark. I packed you some sandwiches and I got you things. And he's just already just a, country boy that's just smiling and happy and just kind of goofy.
Yeah, I think he's just looking for opportunity at this point.
Yeah, so he's not playing a character with Clark Kent. He's like saying golly and stuff because it's just him. It's actually him.
Right.
So he doesn't have that burden of being a superhero yet.
Right. And we still get to, get introduced to the cast of the Daily Planet. Lois Lane's huge supporting character in this book.
Yeah, she comes in like firecracker. Of course,
firecracker, absolutely. Same Flux Luthor, the ultimate villain. He's like still playing world domination and where he can get in at. Like he's like in this universe, he was planning like nuclear war, during the communist era and things like that.
Yeah, like he was the first one to jump in.
Yeah, and you're like, oh. Well, he was kind of going pretty extreme, and he's like, "But we'll be safe, and things like that. And we'll have this bomb shelter." And and at the same time, Superman finds a fortress of solitude, and then meets his real father, Jor-El. And Jor-El still has all of his memory, all of his father's memories ingrained to him. And it was like, I just know like a million, queries and stuff.
Yes. Responses that he pre-programmed for you.
So that was really cool. And he teaches them still how to use his powers and has Superman's costume, which is again, huge landmarks for that character. And So he still has like two fathers, one that kind of prepares him for the future, and one that kind of prepares him for what he needs to be and how he needs to be grow up. So,
which I've always liked that. I liked it in the Christopher Reeves movie, that there was the guidance is also from Krypton. Like he's not just totally figuring out, because he could pick up bad habits from just being around humans.
yeah.
So he needs that guidance from Krypton to kind of come back in and teach him, who he should be, and why the world needs that type of person, right?
Yeah, the guidance. Yeah.
Now, the part 2 where Clark goes into the bar and he meets Pariah, did you?
Yeah.
I mean, you're obviously familiar with the Pariah character.
Yes.
I mean, he's big in the Crisis on
I
Infinite.
guess, yeah. Do we want to go and just kind of say this is kind of like their version of Crisis?
Yeah, and I think it's a good point, because this book, without, like, I guess the idea is, what was the big bad in this book? What was the big evil that needed to be figured out, right?
Yeah.
Every book has to have that. And I like that it just went straight for the biggest threat that ever came to DC Comics. It's like, we're just going to go for the big one, the one that was just like the catalyst to ruin everything. And I thought that was cool, because almost from this point, and mild spoiler, but almost from this point, you felt like there is no winning. So like, what do you do as a superhero? And what do you do as a reader when you notice that there's just no winning?
Right.
Like, that's weird, right?
Yeah.
Like,
and it kind of connects that beginning that I read, where we see like Superman falling to Earth, and he's kind of talking about the end of the world and what he should do with his time. And then when you get to this page and you see Pariah, you're like, oh, they're doing Crisis.
Yeah, you're like, it is the end. That's weird.
Okay, because Crisis on Infinite Earths was basically where DC took all their continuity because it became way too unworldly, and they said, we're going to start from clean slate, kind of rewrite it the way we want to with their modern sensibilities of the time of the 80s and kind of rebuild it up to what they wanted to do. And
it's like we had 100 stories making 100 different possibilities, and now we're just going to actually get rid of them all and go to one.
Yeah. And that was such a huge, that was like the big thing. That was huge for DC to do that. And even Marvel doesn't have anything on that. Nothing like that. So for them to say, all right, I'm Mark Russell and Michael Allred, to say, all right, we're going to do our own Crisis.
And we're going to just have it as like a side story too. Like that was kind of the fun part. Like, hey, this is the story of how superheroes become superheroes. And by the way, this entire universe is going to be.
It doesn't quite create urgency for Superman, but it's like, he said, Pryor warns him, and it's like 20 years. You got 20 years to do whatever the heck you want.
It's on his mind.
Well, you got all the time you want, but you got 20 good years.
So, through it too, the other part of everything is that Lex Luthor is sort of butting heads with Bruce Wayne, and Bruce Wayne is sort of starting to become Batman. Yeah,
I guess Superman and Lex Luthor, they're not even real enemies at this point. It's
I don't
more
think
like
they knew each other for most of the book.
Yeah.
Right.
So it was really interesting how Lex Luthor and Batman or Bruce Wayne really knuckled heads because of like defense contracts.
Yeah.
Defense contractors.
I mean, it was like big money corporation stuff. And then Batman was sort of a side project.
Right.
I mean, he was driven, but I noticed this Batman was not quite as like ruthless, like never rest, go to the ends of the earth. He was just sort of doing a thing. Like I felt like this Batman, not that he fell a little flat, but he just wasn't the vengeance that people think, right? Like he's not the crazy.
I think he felt like he was a street level hero that wanted to fight for crime in the streets and to solve that crime, whereas he very much seen Superman as he doesn't have time to do that, or he doesn't feel that need to do that that groundwork that he can accomplish with what his resources and things like that were.
Yeah, like if Superman's grabbing missiles,
that was
out of the sky.
That was Lois's problem. Okay, what did he? One of the later on, one of the stories is he's Superman's meeting Lois for the first time or second interview or something like that, and he's like, they're having a casual interview, and then he goes, yeah, I just saved you from an asteroid. okay, but what did you do for anyone else?
Yeah.
What did you do for the guy down the street? What did you do for world hunger? What did you do for any disease? You didn't do much.
Yeah, I mean, one of the parts too that
When I read that, I was like, I'm speechless. I would be speechless if I was Superman too.
well, and so like the parts that I really liked with Lois that I kind of marked out. So Lois met with Superman, and then she met up with Clark Kent later, and
Yep.
Clark was like, "How was Superman?" And she's like, "Well, to be honest, he's a little disappointing."
Yes.
And she says, "It's just hard to trust somebody so aware of their own power. It's like he's trying to the whole time to convince you that it's okay that he has all this power, or he's convincing himself."
Mm-hmm.
And she says, "I just don't really know if you have enormous power, why do you still sign autographs? And why do you get cats out of trees? And why
Right.
do you just do this little stuff?" Right.
Sure.
And Superman kind of jokes it's because people give him free food. But the bigger part of it was, he said, being that it makes people feel like they matter no matter who they are, no matter how great or small their problems are. And
Yeah.
Superman says, maybe that's why it's so important to give people hope, even when there's no good reason for it, because hope is the lie we make come true. And
Yes.
that comes up a lot over,
Yes. And
comes
that,
up again and again.
Yeah,
and it's
that's
like the
one of
theme
his,
of the book.
yeah, is hope, or Superman's thoughts on hope.
Yeah,
And
that
I
hope
think
is a
legacy
lie
and
until
things
we
like
make
that.
it come true.
Right.
So
The
when you read
optimism.
that, yeah, hope is just a promise. It's just something saying, don't worry, it'll be better. And then
Mhm.
one day you do make it better.
Yep.
And so it's like, that's the promise.
Sure.
But at first it's a lie. So it's kind of nice to see that Superman understands that he has to be the hope that everyone needs,
Right.
because someday he'll make it truth.
Huh?
I guess it's a good way to say it.
That's a pretty big statement.
Yeah.
So, yeah, reading stuff like that, I'm like, Mark, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What? Okay. I didn't know we were getting like really deep on this book, but we're getting deeper. All right.
Yeah, I mean, almost.
Yeah.
Honestly, the writing in this is so good. Almost
It's
every
pretty
few
profound.
pages, there's
Yeah.
a really good, like, oh wow, that's a great moment.
Yeah,
right
you
there.
take and pause and think about
Yeah.
it for a little bit.
Yeah, it was very good.
Absolutely. Some other things that kind of happen along the ways, that was big, like changes from main DC continuity, is they, what was it? Lex Luthor blows up as a test, Coastal City. Because that was Green Lantern's like big thing.
Yeah,
Was he is it Emerald Dawn, or during that saga there where he kind of
yes.
is afflicted by parallax and stuff, he's
When Hal kind of just
loses
it.
his mind, and he destroys Coastal City. Well, in this version, Lex Luthor wants to test out his nuclear bomb, and he's like, well, I'll just test it over here at the naval base nobody cares about. Well, in Coastal City naval base, yeah. And that's also the naval base, I think, where I think it's Lois's dad.
Yes,
Yeah,
it was.
is that.
Yeah.
And so that really shakes her as well. So, it's
Well, and
like,
it also
whoa.
it was kind of a wake up call for the superheroes, because
Yes.
they were just starting to band together a little bit, and it is kind of funny because a few more pages and boom, they're all together. It's like there's Green Lantern and Aquaman and Wonder Woman and Flash.
Right.
And
yeah.
I thought, wow, they just went all in on the Hall of Justice, and now you have to figure out how to write the difference between all of them. And I give major props to Mark Russell that he wrote each character. I mean, it was just hilarious. Like Flash is really funny in this.
Right. Yeah, he's working on how to defuse a bomb. During their like meeting, they're like, "Oh, I just got to play with the wires. You know how many times I get asked to defuse a bomb during the week? So many times. So many times."
He's like, "I just diffused 6 of them while we've been at this meeting."
And they're like, "What? Oh, okay."
But I like that too, because he's like building little ships in a bottle and stuff like that too.
Right.
Where he's the Flash. So for him, he even says in there, you guys talk way too slow.
Mhm.
You take too long to think about things. You take too long to act. So he's the one who is the fastest man alive. So it would make sense that, everyone's been in boring meetings, that in between the quiet moments, he's learning how to defuse a bomb, and he's building a ship in a bottle, and he's running around the outside fixing things while people are just sort of thinking about responses,
right,
which is hilarious.
Yeah. So that was interesting to see. And yeah, it's pretty phenomenal what he's trying to accomplish. Also some more Easter eggs, like the bar they go to, the Seagull. It's right next to the shoe store. That's going back to the creators.
Oh yeah.
You didn't get that?
No, I didn't get
Oh
that.
my gosh.
I was like, where is that? What are you talking about? As soon as you said
So
it,
yeah,
I said,
Joe Schuster and it's Joe Schuster and
Siegel and Schuster.
Yeah, Siegel and Schuster. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I didn't
Yeah,
know that.
they're like the big creators of Superman.
Well,
Like,
I must not have even read that.
oh, here it is at the beginning of the book. It's so I don't know if DC has to print it at the beginning of every Superman book or whenever he's in there because of the arrangements. But it says Superman created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Schuster by special arrangements with the Jerry Siegel family, and they have to print that. So when like that's the bar, like him and Lois go drink at, and Clark doesn't drink, he just drinks milk.
Yes,
and so that's the only bar in town that'll serve him cold milk. I was like, eh. That was funny.
Like, yep, country boy. There
Yeah.
you go.
What was another favorite Easter egg you had?
I mean, for me, I think the whole way they handled Batman was sort of like an odd Easter egg because
Sure.
his costume changed as the decades went by, which was expected. He gets better and better. And that was one thing I always really liked about Batman. But in his fundraiser, he does like a fundraiser in Wayne Manor.
Oh, yeah.
And he's in that like all gold costume, right?
Yes.
And then he runs back up to change because he's now going to leave as Batman. But in that, he has the little Shakespeare bust and the red phone from Adam West.
Oh, he does.
Yep. And so
yep.
it's really fun to see that they just have it in the room as decor. But
yeah, it's like
everyone who's seen the Adam West notices that there's the bust and there's the red phone.
Yeah.
And you know, they'll call attention to it, but I just love when they do stuff
it's
like
just
that.
in the room. Yep. Absolutely. So yeah, that was really cool. I think there's a shirt worn by a character in the back of the book. He's like one of the extras, and it's like a upside down, or it's a smiley face, but it's like sad. I didn't know if he was making fun of Watchmen.
Oh, probably.
I don't know. It seems like very odd just to put it there. So I was like, maybe that's a Watchmen Easter egg because you know the last part set in the 80s. That'd be kind of cool.
So let's talk about the art a little bit.
Yes.
We just have to mention that. So, of course, Mike Allred does all of the pencil work, and his wife, Laura, does all the coloring. So they're the dynamic duo. I would say that the only
you said that
thing,
on purpose.
Yes. The only thing that is really kind of funny with Allred is that he draws characters where you can recognize the differences right away. Like he has instant, different hairstyles, different facial expressions, different builds, different height. That's what I always enjoy when people are drawing multiple characters. Sometimes you see artists and they're all general. Like sometimes it becomes the same and you're like,
sure.
Oh, that's a chiseled jawline from that guy. It's the same chiseled jawline on every superhero.
Yeah, that's just a style.
Yeah. So Allred does really great. But like when people are falling or flying or running or something, sometimes they're like really cut out. They're like they're almost just like pasted on the page, like frozen in a pose, and you don't get like that sense of movement. But in a story like this where you're focusing a lot on the writing, I thought it was kind of nice that the art was just sort of like pasted on that way.
Sure.
Like so you don't have to like
it helps flow.
Yeah,
it's got
like,
really good flow and pacing.
It's super clear. It's super crisp. Like that's just how their art is. It's just really clean. Yes. Everything has a really dark outline, so it feels like it's
the inks are very dark,
solid.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's not like a blocky, but it's like it's cartoony. It's definitely his own style. Look it up. It is. You can't copy it. No. You can't.
It's like a cartoon, but you paused it, and that's what they're using. So some other artists, you get a real like sense of movement, and like even when his people are like flying, the cape is just sort of stuck. It's not like it's flowing to me. It feels like it's just sort of a frozen moment.
Sure, I could see that with like a building on fire, and it's like a still frame.
Yeah.
absolutely. I can see that. Yeah. Or like the wedding, as they're getting married, he definitely like poses. He is very good with posing a character.
Yeah, I mean, he does a good job of like at least um well, I guess that's Laura's job,
Yeah.
but does a good job of like when it switches from one character to the next, you know what character they're going to show.
Oh,
So
sure.
like Batman is just sort of all darker tones,
Hmm.
and Superman's all brighter tone, real easy shifts in colors, but at the same time, he does a good job showing the page full of detail when he needs it, you
Yes.
know.
I will say it does take a little bit to get used to the style just because it's so vibrant
Yeah.
between his art and the colors. And that's just very much distinctly their style. Is that you almost have to adjust your eyes or just read just a page or two and just kind of get used to it, look at it a little bit because you're in for it the whole ride.
Yeah.
Because
Like when
once
she
you're
picks
invested in
green,
it,
it's
you'll love it.
green. When she picks yellow, it's yellow. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's,
Yeah, they're very vibrant colors and distinct colors. Like you said, bold inks and things. So there's sharpness to it. That's a good word. There's very sharpness to
mhm.
everything they draw, um, and color and things like that. So it's very poignant. So it's
But see,
unlike.
like even Batman here,
Yep.
he doesn't feel like he's moving. He just sort of is
No.
like pasted into the sky.
Right. He's jumping out the window, but you capture a frame of it.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, like you're taking a picture, for sure. Even like their conversations, like in the like they do some
Yeah.
9-page paneling, and you kind of have this close up of their faces with him and Brainiac and debating something, and he really goes for the close up of their faces, and it's just you see all the expression and or lack of expression from Superman. It's
Yeah,
more
yes.
expressive in Brainiac, but Superman's kind of still trying to process like, oh, the screen alien talking.
Well, and so, I think the ultimate idea of this story, because I always try to think like, okay, now that you've written this story, you've made this book,
Yes.
and from beginning to end, what was the point, right? What was the purpose?
Right.
And I think the ultimate purpose of this was just number one, to help people think of superheroes differently.
Yes.
I don't think that it falls into that like valley of like being dramatic just for drama, like sometimes you get a comic and you're like, okay, I get it, you're really trying to just drum up this, woe is the life of a superhero. And I think for this, it was really great to see that, Superman had hope, and he still has hope, and it actually ends the book with hope, like, oh, you know what, like it
Yeah,
actually,
we won't spoil the ending
yeah,
for you because you should read that.
it came out with a good ending. It was
Yep.
like, okay, like it looked like it was, a win-lose and not a draw, but like, I don't know. It just felt like, well, everything's going to pot.
Yeah.
But at the same time, while it sort of does, it sort of doesn't. So it is a really good story. And I thought the other part of it is to span 30 years in one book was pretty hard to do.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of guts to do it.
There's beginnings, there's weddings, there's showing characters that are evolving. There's
characters die.
Yeah, Batman becoming better and kids growing up, and it's like, wow, there's a lot going on in this book, and it's just a little.
You're setting a story with real life events against a book that is doing a retelling or your own retelling of Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Yeah.
Wow. And that sounds ambitious.
It would have been just as easy to say this book spanned 3 months. But no, it's a 3 decades of superhero-ness, I suppose.
That kind of goes back to one of my other favorite scenes in this book where Superman is going up to his father on the farm and chucking corn. And he's talking about he's like, well, why are you here? You're wearing your suit. You just want to shuck corn? Yeah, sure. And he kind of talks about you could do it. You have all these powers and you could do it so easy. But you know what? Sometimes it's just we want to do it the right way.
Yeah, because like Superman said, I could finish this whole field before you.
Yeah.
Before you finished one.
Mm-hmm.
He said, yeah, you could. And that's the other thing too.
No, yeah.
Just because you have your powers,
that,
are you using them in the right way, or why do you need to use them? You know, kind of the same way as just normal people doing normal things. Yes, you could probably do it faster, but you could do it slower and enjoy it a little better too. So it's like, what's the trade-off?
Right. Mark probably could have just did either or of these concepts that we were talking about of just doing life events around the day in the life of Superman growing up. And he could have just did that.
And that would have been
fine. Or he could have just focused on the later half and did Crisis on Infinite Earths. But he decided to do a little combination of both because that was just how it went in the times that he grew up with, that he was writing comics. And that was probably one of his favorite periods to explore. And he wanted to see what stories he could come out with.
Well, you said before that, it looks like they have a really good knowledge of superheroes and just history of superheroes, but I think they both do. I think Mark is, the ultimate fan, and then Mike Allred is like, okay, I know how to draw these from all ages. So if you want to draw something that's distinctly the feel of the 60s and 70s, I could do that too.
Right. So heck of a killer combo. So as we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, Mark Russell and Mike Allred are going to actually do a Batman book. That is next. And then they said, hey, we'll do a third book as part of a trilogy. They just haven't announced what that book will be about. So I am looking forward to what that Batman project looks like. Maybe it'll be quite unexpected because Batman's not the same character he starts at the beginning of the book to the end of the book. It was interesting to see that Batman was kind of like a co-main or a side story of the Superman, even though it's Superman Space Age, like he's still a huge part of this book.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting. Maybe they'll twist it on Batman will be the main character and maybe Superman will be on the side. That'd be kind of cool to explore, or have like a co-main character that you could do like a side project with. I can't wait to see what that is. And I hope they do like Wonder Woman for their third book, or I could see Flash.
I mean, they're a good team up, and it actually works really well because the ideas in the writing kind of translate again into the artwork, where you're not trying to do too much.
Right.
It's just you're involved in the story, and the art is just there to push it along.
Yeah.
One last little quote that I really liked was when Superman was talking to reporters at the end, and they were asking him, like, well, you could be taking out terrorists and drug dealers, and why are you trying to heal us? Why are you trying to fix the world when you could just go around and just get rid of all the evil that's happening? And he said, well, you could focus on the evil and you could heal the world with violence, but that's not what will heal it. Yeah, right.
We go on down Injustice. You want to do
he
that?
said,
No.
Life is a battle that we all lose. So he was reminding everyone, eventually we're just all going to die. So he's like, life is a battle that we all lose, which is why you can't live it like it's a war. So just,
it's very powerful.
Yeah. Live your life, do good things, and don't try to just battle everything all the time.
Yep. Cool. Well, I can't top that.
There you go. That was straight from Superman's mouth.
Right. Again, this was our 2023 book of the year, and I hope you enjoyed listening to the show. It's good to be back, and we can't wait to share with you more books and keep the podcast going.
Yeah.
All right. This has been another great episode of BAM POW Comic Hour. This is Andrew Garner
and Chris Ramos
signing off.
Good.